The emergency lights bathed the Galactic Council chambers in red as alarms screamed across New Haven Station. Ambassador Thren's hands shook as he watched the holographic display show another star system going dark. The Harvester machines had consumed everything in the Outer Rim territories, turning planets into raw metal and energy for their endless expansion. Thren belonged to the Villani, a peaceful bird-like species that had never known war before the machines came. His bright blue feathers had turned gray with stress over the past few months as world after world fell silent. The Council's combined fleets had tried to stop the mechanical swarm, but their weapons barely scratched the alien hulls. "We need to send another distress signal," Thren said to the emergency assembly. Representatives from dozens of species filled the chamber, all sharing the same look of terror. The elegant Zorians, with their crystal skin, sat next to the plant-like Verdani, while the aquatic depths floated in their water tanks. All of them had one thing in common. Their military forces had failed against the Harvesters. Commander Voss, of the Terran Defense League, shook his head. "We've sent signals to every known civilization. The hegemony won't respond because they're too far away. The Federation is dealing with their own border conflicts. Nobody else has ships that can fight these things." The Harvesters weren't like any enemy the galaxy had faced before. They moved in perfect coordination, adapting to every tactic the Council tried. Energy weapons that should have destroyed ships instead got absorbed and redirected. Missiles were intercepted by point defense systems that never missed. The machines learned from every battle, becoming stronger with each victory. Thren looked at the tactical display again. 3 more systems had gone silent while they debated. Billions of lives snuffed out in hours as the machines stripped away. Everything organic, leaving only empty space behind. His own homeworld was only 2 jumps away from the advancing fleet. "There has to be someone," he whispered. "Some civilization we haven't contacted yet." Dr. Caney, the Council's xenobiology expert, pulled up a star chart. "There are a few isolated systems we've cataloged, but never made contact with. Most are considered too dangerous or primitive to bother with diplomatic missions." The display zoomed in on a small yellow star near the galaxy's edge. "Sol System," the readout said. "Third planet designated as Extreme Environment World. Inhabited by species classified as Death Worlders due to planetary conditions incompatible with galactic standard life support." "Death Worlders?" asked Thren. He'd heard the term before but never paid attention to it. Most Council species lived on garden worlds with stable climates and gentle gravity. Death worlds were places where the environment itself tried to kill anything that lived there. "The planet Earth," Dr. Kane explained. "Gravity nearly twice galactic standard, massive temperature variations, toxic atmosphere composition for most species, frequent natural disasters. The fact that intelligent life evolved there at all is considered a statistical impossibility." Commander Voss studied the data. "What kind of technology level are we talking about?" "Primitive by our standards. They've barely achieved faster-than-light travel. Their ships use chemical rockets for basic propulsion, no energy shields, no gravity manipulation, no quantum computers. They're at least 1,000 years behind modern civilization." Thren felt his hope dying. What could primitive Death Worlders do against machines that had crushed the Council's best forces? But as he watched another red dot appear on the tactical display, marking yet another lost world, he realized they had no choice left. "Send the distress signal anyway," he decided, "to every system, including the Death Worlds. If we're going to die, at least we can say we tried everything." The communication technician, a young Zorian named Crystal, began broadcasting on all known frequencies. Her voice echoed through the chamber as she transmitted the message that would reach across hundreds of light years. "This is New Haven Station, broadcasting emergency distress signal to all spacefaring civilizations. The Harvester machine intelligence has breached our outer defenses and is consuming inhabited star systems. We have lost contact with over 30 worlds in the past week. Our military forces are insufficient to stop their advance. Any civilization capable of rendering military assistance, please respond immediately. Billions of lives depend on your aid. The message repeated in dozens of languages and communication formats, spreading through subspace toward every corner of known space. Most of the recipients would be too far away to help or too weak to make a difference. But Thren found himself hoping that somewhere out there someone would answer. Hours passed with no response. The council representatives began making preparations to evacuate their homeworlds, though everyone knew the harvesters moved too fast for most civilian populations to escape. The machines could cross a star system in days, while evacuation fleets needed weeks to move entire populations. Then Crystal's equipment started picking up a transmission from the Sol system. The signal was crude compared to Galactic standard communications, using primitive electromagnetic waves instead of quantum entanglement. But the message was clear. New Haven Station. This is Captain Reed of the United Earthship Ironclad responding to your distress call. We have received your tactical data on the Harvester threat. The human fleet is preparing to depart for your coordinates. Estimated arrival time is 72 hours. Please transmit detailed enemy movement patterns and defensive positions. Read out. Thren stared at the communication console in confusion. Human fleet? How many ships are they sending? Crystal worked her controls, trying to get more information from the primitive signal. I'm reading approximately 50 vessels, Ambassador. But the energy signatures are strange. These ships don't match any known design patterns. Commander Voss laughed bitterly. 50 ships. We lost 300 vessels in the last engagement. What can 50 primitive ships do against the harvesters? But Thren found himself remembering something Dr. Caney had said about Deathworlders. They lived in conditions that would kill most galactic species. Their entire evolution had been shaped by a world that tried to destroy them every day. Maybe that meant something. Maybe creatures that had learned to survive the impossible could do things that civilized species couldn't. Transmit all our tactical data to the human fleet, Thren ordered. Defense patterns, enemy movements, weapon specifications, everything. We have. As the information streamed toward Earth, Thren wondered what kind of beings they had just called for help. In 72 hours, they would find out if Deathworlders could succeed where the galaxy's greatest military minds had failed. The observation deck of New Haven Station buzzed with nervous energy as alien dignitaries gathered to watch for the human fleet. Dr. Lorne pressed her face against the transparent aluminum viewport, scanning the empty space beyond the station's defensive perimeter. As the Council's chief military analyst, she had studied every known starship design in the galaxy, but the approaching vessels remained a mystery. 60 hours had passed since the humans confirmed their approach vector. Long range. Sensors detected the fleet 2 systems away, but the readings made no sense. The ships appeared to be moving without proper gravity drives, using some kind of crude reaction propulsion that left massive energy trails behind them. Their hulls showed up as solid metal instead of the energy-resistant composites that modern civilization used for spacecraft construction. Ambassador Thren stood beside her, his blue feathers ruffled with anxiety. The latest reports showed Harvester scout groups probing the system's outer planets, testing the defenses that had already failed 3 times before. Every tactical simulation predicted total defeat within hours of the main enemy fleet's arrival. Contact. On long-range sensors, announced Lieutenant Vale from the communication station. The young officer's voice cracked with tension as she studied her instruments. 51 vessels dropping out of hyperspace at coordinates 77 Mark IV. The viewport automatically darkened as the human ships emerged from their faster-than-light transit. Instead of the graceful curves and flowing lines that marked civilized spacecraft, angular shadows appeared against the stars. The human vessels looked like weapons that someone had attached engines to, bristling with gun turrets and armor plating that seemed excessive even for military craft. Dr. Lorne counted the ships as they formed up in attack formation. Destroyers, cruisers, and what appeared to be a single massive battleship bringing up the rear. But something about their design philosophy disturbed her. These weren't ships built for exploration or diplomacy. They were instruments of war, created by minds that understood violence in ways the galactic community had forgotten. "This is Admiral Brooks of the Human Expeditionary Force requesting permission to approach New Haven Station," came the transmission. The voice carried an accent Dr. Lorne had never heard before. Clipped and precise, but with an underlying hardness that made her skin crawl. Thren activated his communicator with trembling fingers. "Admiral Brooks, this is Ambassador Thren speaking, for the Galactic Council. We are grateful for your response to our distress call. Please be advised that Harvester Advanced Scouts are already in the system. Our defensive fleet is positioned behind the fourth planet's moon, following standard engagement protocols." A pause stretched across the communication channel before Admiral Brooks responded. "Understood, Ambassador. We'll handle the scouts first, then take up defensive positions around your station." Dr. Lorne watched in horror as the human fleet changed course away from the moon where the Council forces waited. Instead of joining the established defensive line, they accelerated directly toward the inner system where the Harvester scouts were conducting their reconnaissance sweep. "Admiral Brooks," Thren transmitted frantically, "you're moving toward enemy contact. Standard galactic military doctrine calls for consolidated defensive positions to maximize overlapping fire zones. You should fall back to our prepared positions." "Thanks for the tactical advice, Ambassador," came the reply. "We'll stick with our own doctrine." The human ships spread out in what Dr. Lorne recognized as an aggressive hunting formation. This wasn't defensive positioning at all. These Deathworlders were actually planning to attack the Harvester Scouts instead of waiting for the enemy to come to them. On the tactical display, red dots marked 12 Harvester Scout vessels conducting systematic sweeps of the asteroid belt. These machines were smaller than the main war units, but still carried enough firepower to destroy most Council ships in single combat. The standard response was to avoid contact until the full defensive fleet could concentrate its fire. The humans apparently had different ideas about standard responses. Lieutenant Vale gasped as her sensors registered the first weapons discharge from the human fleet. "Energy spike from the lead destroyer, but I'm not reading laser or particle beam signatures. The projectiles appear to be solid matter." Dr. Lorne stared at her instruments in disbelief. "That's impossible. No civilized species uses kinetic weapons in space combat. The energy requirements for effective range and velocity are prohibitive." But the results spoke for themselves. Streams of metal projectiles crossed the void at significant fractions of light speed, slamming into the nearest Harvester Scout with devastating effect. The machine's energy shields, designed to deflect and absorb directed energy weapons, offered no protection against solid matter traveling at relativistic velocities. The scout vessel came apart in a shower of sparks and debris as its hull integrity failed. Within seconds, the entire human fleet opened fire with the same primitive but effective weapons, filling space with a storm of projectiles that the Harvester point defenses couldn't track or intercept. "They're using ballistic weapons," Dr. Lorne whispered. "Actual physical ammunition fired from chemical or electromagnetic launchers. It's like fighting with rocks and slings compared to our technology, but it was working. The Harvester Scouts, programmed to counter energy weapons and guided missiles, had no tactical responses for dealing with clouds of solid projectiles. Their adaptive algorithms struggled to compute effective countermeasures against weapons that operated on such basic principles. More scouts died as the human destroyers closed to what any sane military commander would consider suicidal range. Instead of maintaining safe distances for long-range engagement, the Deathworlder ships dove directly into the enemy formation, their crews apparently unconcerned about taking return fire at point-blank range. The UES Ironclad leading the charge actually collided with a damaged Harvester Scout. Instead of breaking off or trying to avoid the impact, The human crew used their ship as a battering ram, crushing the alien machine against their armored hull before finishing it off with close-range cannon fire. "Barbarians," breathed Commander Zell of the Hegemony Liaison Office. "They fight like wild animals instead of intelligent beings." Thren watched the tactical display with growing amazement as the last scout vessel exploded under concentrated human fire. In less than 20 minutes, the Deathworlders had accomplished what Council forces had never managed: the complete destruction of a Harvester reconnaissance force with 0 friendly losses. Admiral Brooks' voice crackled over the communication channel again. "Scout force eliminated. Recommend all civilian vessels evacuate to minimum safe distance. Our sensors indicate the main Harvester fleet will arrive within 6 hours. "Admiral," Thren asked, "what are your defensive requirements? Where do you want our remaining ships? Positioned?" Another pause. "Keep your people well back, Ambassador. This is going to get messy." As the human fleet reformed and took up positions throughout the inner system, Dr. Lorne realized she was watching something unprecedented. These weren't just military vessels. They were weapons wielded by a species that had learned to fight, on a world that tried to kill them every day of their lives. The question was whether creatures forged by such brutality could stand against machines designed to consume entire civilizations. In 6 hours, they would all find out what happened when Deathworlders went to war. The massive Harvester war fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a plague of mechanical locusts, their geometrical hulls blotting out entire sections of the star field. From his position aboard the command cruiser Retribution, Captain Reed watched through the bridge viewport as hundreds of enemy vessels took formation in the outer system. Each ship stretched over a kilometer in length, bristling with energy weapons that had reduced Council fleets to glowing vapor. Reed turned to his tactical officer, a young woman named Torres, who had grown up in the asteroid mining colonies where gravity shifts and radiation storms were daily hazards. Her hands moved steadily across her instruments despite the magnitude of what they faced. Like all humans, she had learned early that fear was just another environmental factor to be managed and overcome. "Enemy fleet composition, Torres," Reed ordered. "Reading 437 vessels, sir. Mix of cruiser and battleship class units based on energy signatures. They're maintaining standard geometric formation, spacing for optimal overlapping fire coverage." Torres paused, studying her readings. "Sir, I'm also detecting some kind of jamming field. They're trying to disrupt our communications and targeting systems." Reed smiled coldly. The Harvesters had clearly studied galactic military doctrine and developed countermeasures for every conventional tactic. Their jamming would cripple ships that relied on quantum computers and energy-based targeting systems. Unfortunately for the machines, human technology worked on more basic principles. "Switch to mechanical backup systems," Reed commanded. "All ships prepare for manual targeting protocols." Across the human fleet, crews abandoned their electronic instruments in favor of optical sights and ballistic computers that worked with simple mathematics instead of quantum calculations. The Harvester jamming meant nothing to weapons that operated on Newtonian physics and chemical propulsion. The enemy fleet began its advance, moving in the careful formation that had proven successful against every galactic military force. Each ship maintained precise distances from its neighbors, creating interlocking fields of fire that could concentrate devastating energy on any target that approached within range. It was a perfect tactical deployment against rational opponents, who would engage at maximum distance. Admiral Brooks's voice crackled over the communication system from her flagship. "All units, execute Plan Anvil. Remember, these machines learn from conventional tactics. Don't give them anything conventional to learn from." Reed watched his navigation display as the human fleet scattered in what appeared to be complete chaos. Instead of maintaining formation or falling back to defensive positions, destroyers and cruisers spread out across the system in seemingly random patterns. To any observer trained in galactic military doctrine, it looked like panic. The Harvesters, responded exactly as predicted, adjusting their formation to pursue individual human ships. Their artificial intelligence calculated optimal firing solutions and began engagement at maximum range, confident that their energy weapons would pick off the scattered enemies one by one. They discovered their first mistake when the humans refused to engage at long range. Reed's destroyer dove toward the nearest harvester cruiser, acceleration pressing him back in his command chair as the ship's chemical rockets burned at maximum thrust. Enemy particle beams lashed out toward his vessel, but the human ship's evasive maneuvers followed no predictable pattern. Reed had ordered his pilot to use asteroid navigation protocols, treating enemy fire like cosmic debris to be avoided through random course changes. The harvester's targeting systems, designed to predict rational flight paths, couldn't lock onto a ship that flew like its crew had gone insane. Energy beams meant to vaporize the human destroyer instead carved harmless furrows through empty space. Range to target, 2,000 kilometers and closing, Torres reported. Her voice remained steady despite the fact that they were flying directly into the teeth of enemy fire. Recommend engaging with forward batteries. Negative, Reed replied. Take us to knife fighting, range. The bridge crew exchanged glances but followed orders without question. They were humans, after all. They had evolved from creatures that hunted animals 10 times their size, using nothing but sharpened sticks and teamwork. Suicide charges were just another hunting strategy, at 500 kilometers, close enough to see individual weapon ports. On the enemy hull, Reed finally gave the order to fire. The destroyer's forward cannons spoke with chemical thunder, hurling streams of depleted uranium projectiles at the harvester cruiser's hull. At point-blank range, the kinetic weapons punched through armor that energy shields couldn't protect, sending cascades of sparks and debris spinning into space. The harvester tried to rotate away from the human ship, but Reed had anticipated the move. Emergency burn, 90 degrees starboard. Bring us alongside their engineering section. The destroyer's maneuvering thrusters fired with violent precision, slamming the crew against their acceleration couches as the ship changed course in ways that would have killed most galactic species. Humans had grown up under crushing gravity and learned to handle forces that would turn other beings into paste against the bulkheads. Torres opened fire with the ship's broadside batteries, filling space with streams of solid projectiles that chewed through the harvester's hull like acid. Through paper, secondary explosions began blooming along the enemy ship's flanks as ammunition found fuel lines and power conduits. The machine intelligence had never encountered tactics this brutal or direct. Across the system, similar scenes played out as human ships closed to ranges that galactic naval doctrine considered impossible. Destroyers rammed damaged harvesters, their reinforced hulls designed to survive asteroid impacts. Cruisers engaged multiple enemies simultaneously, their crews accepting losses that would horrify civilized commanders. The human battleship, Dreadnought, demonstrated the ultimate expression of Death Worlder tactics by flying directly through a formation of 6 harvester vessels, her massive hull grinding against alien metal as her gun batteries fired in all directions. When enemy return fire finally breached her armor, the crew sealed the damaged sections and kept fighting from what remained of their ship. Reed watched his tactical display as red icons marking harvester vessels began disappearing from the screen. The machines had been programmed to counter every known form of space combat, but nobody had taught them how to fight opponents who treated their own ships as expendable weapons. "Sir," Torres called out, "enemy fleet is attempting to withdraw to long range. They're pulling back from close engagement." Reed studied the developing tactical situation. The harvesters had lost nearly a third of their fleet to human ships that, by all rights, should have been destroyed in the opening minutes of battle. The machine intelligence was trying to adapt, falling back to distances where their energy weapons would have clear advantages. "All ships, pursue and maintain contact," Reed ordered. "Don't let them disengage." The human fleet charged after the retreating harvesters like a pack of wolves pursuing wounded prey. They had learned something important about their enemy today. The machines could be hurt, could be confused, could even be frightened if you hit them hard enough and fast enough. For the first time since the Harvester invasion began, alien observers watching from New Haven Station saw enemy ships fleeing from the battlefield. The Deathworlders had found a way to fight monsters by becoming something even more terrifying. Commander Stone crawled through the twisted wreckage of a Harvester heavy cruiser, her combat suit systems struggling to maintain life support in the chaos of the damaged vessel. Behind her, 12 members of her boarding team followed through. Corridors that would have been death traps for most galactic species. Emergency lighting flickered randomly, gravity generators created pockets of crushing force and weightless voids, while toxic gases leaked from ruptured coolant lines. For the humans, these conditions felt almost like home. Stone had grown up in the deep mining stations of Europa, where equipment failures meant sudden decompression and radiation exposure was just another workplace hazard. Her team came from similar backgrounds: asteroid miners, deep-sea workers, polar researchers who had learned to function in environments that would kill most civilized beings within minutes. Atmo readings, Lopez, Stone called to her technical specialist, a compact woman whose family had worked the sulfur mines of Io for 3 generations. 15% oxygen, 30% carbon dioxide, rest is mostly methane and hydrogen sulfide, Lopez reported, checking her scanner. Temperature, varying between -40 and +90 Celsius depending on which pipes are leaking. Radiation levels are about what you'd expect from a damaged fusion reactor. Stone nodded, making mental adjustments for the hazardous environment. For most species, these conditions would require full environmental suits and extensive life support. Equipment. The humans were operating in basic combat armor that provided minimal protection. They had evolved on a world where the atmosphere tried to poison them, where temperature swings could kill the unprepared, where background radiation was just another fact of life. The boarding team advanced deeper into the Harvester ship, following readings that indicated the vessel's central processing core. The machine intelligence controlling this particular cruiser was still functional despite the massive damage inflicted by human kinetic weapons, which meant it was continuing to coordinate with the rest of the enemy fleet. "Movement ahead," whispered Sergeant Pike, the team's forward scout. The big man had spent years hunting in Earth's most dangerous wilderness areas, tracking creatures that could smell fear and hear heartbeats from hundreds of meters away. "Looks like automated defenses." 3 spider-like harvester drones emerged. From hidden alcoves, their manipulator arms crackling with lethal energy charges. Most galactic military forces would have taken cover and engaged at maximum range, using sophisticated weapons to destroy the machines from safety. The humans charged directly at the drones with weapons that fired solid projectiles and chemical explosives. Stone led the assault, her rifle chattering as streams of armor-piercing rounds chewed through the nearest drone's carapace. Pike flanked to the right, moving with the fluid grace of a predator that had learned to hunt things bigger and more dangerous than himself. When his ammunition ran out, he simply grabbed the damaged drone and used his suit's servos to crush its central processor with his bare hands. The third drone tried to retreat deeper into the ship, but Lopez cut it off with a plasma cutter that she used like a melee weapon. The tool was designed for salvage work in zero gravity, but it proved equally effective at carving through alien metal and circuitry. "Drones neutralized," Stone reported to the fleet command. Proceeding to target. The team moved through sections of the ship that defied conventional understanding of spacecraft design. The Harvesters had built their vessels without consideration for organic life, creating spaces with crushing gravity, toxic atmospheres, and radiation levels that would sterilize most living tissue. The machines had never expected boarders who could function in such conditions. Stone's suit sensors detected another defensive system activating ahead. Some kind of area denial weapon that flooded the corridor with electromagnetic pulses designed to disable electronic equipment. The pulse would shut down the guidance systems and targeting computers that most galactic forces relied on for combat effectiveness. "EMP field detected," Lopez announced. "Looks like it cycles every 30 seconds. Recommend we wait for— Negative, Stone interrupted. We go through it. The team advanced into the energy field, their equipment sparking and failing as electromagnetic pulses fried delicate circuits. But humans had learned to fight with broken tools and malfunctioning equipment. When their heads-up displays went dark, they navigated by sight and sound. When their targeting systems failed, they aimed using instincts developed through millions of years of hunting dangerous prey. The central processing core lay behind a series of blast doors that should have been impossible to breach without heavy demolition equipment. The Harvester intelligence had sealed itself behind armor that could withstand orbital bombardment, confident that no boarding party could penetrate its defenses. It hadn't counted on opponents who treated impossibility as just another challenge to overcome. Stone studied the massive doors, her mind working through possibilities that would never occur to more civilized species. Lopez, what's the power source for these barriers? Looks like they're drawing from the main fusion reactor through conduits that run— Oh. Lopez's expression changed as she realized what Stone was thinking. Those conduits run right through the outer hull where we damaged the ship. Pike. Set charges on the hull breach. When that fusion conduit ruptures, we'll have about 10 seconds before this whole section depressurizes. The plan was insane by any rational standard. They were going to blow a hole in their own escape route, gambling that they could reach the processing core and complete their mission before the ship's atmosphere vented into space. Most military forces would have called for backup, or tried to find a safer approach. The humans triggered the explosives and charged into the resulting chaos. The blast doors lost power as their energy supply was severed, massive barriers sliding open just as the corridor behind the boarding team exploded, outward in a rush of escaping atmosphere. Stone dove through the opening, her team close behind, racing against decompression and structural collapse. The processing core occupied a spherical chamber filled with crystalline matrices that pulsed with the alien intelligence's thoughts. This was the brain of the ship, the seat of consciousness for a machine mind that had calculated the destruction of entire star systems. Stone planted her demolition charges without ceremony, treating the alien intelligence like any other piece of equipment that needed to be destroyed. The processing core tried to communicate, broadcasting pleading signals in a dozen galactic languages, offering technological secrets in exchange for survival. The humans activated the charges and left the chamber without bothering to respond. As the boarding team fought their way back through the collapsing ship, Stone reflected on the fundamental difference between her species and the rest of galactic civilization. Other races had advanced beyond the need for violence, developing sophisticated technologies and civilized approaches to conflict resolution. Humans had learned to thrive in conditions where civilization itself was a luxury they couldn't afford. They had evolved to fight monsters, and when you knew how to fight monsters, even the most advanced alien intelligence was just another predator to be hunted down and eliminated. The Harvester cruiser died in a massive explosion as its processing core overloaded, taking with it the accumulated tactical knowledge of dozens of conquered civilizations. Throughout the system, other human boarding teams were conducting similar operations, turning the machine's own ships into weapons against them. For the first time in their expansion across the galaxy, the Harvesters were learning what it meant to be prey. The Harvester mothership emerged from hyperspace like a mechanical planet, its surface bristling with weapon systems that could crack continents and boil oceans. Admiral Brooks stood in the command center of her flagship, studying the tactical display that showed the true scope of what they faced. The vessel stretched over 50 kilometers in length, protected by energy shields that had never been breached, and defended by weapon arrays that could destroy entire fleets. Every military computer in the galaxy had run simulations against the mothership. The results were always the same: total annihilation of any attacking force within minutes of engagement. The logical response was siege warfare, gradually wearing down its defenses over months or years, while minimizing friendly casualties. Brooks had lived through the Australian wildfires as a child, watching her hometown burn while she and her family took shelter in a cave system that should have been a death trap. She had learned early that sometimes the only way to survive impossible odds was to do something so crazy that it worked despite all logic. "All ships, form up for Operation Death Wish," she announced over the fleet communication system. Her staff exchanged worried glances. They knew what the operation entailed: a direct assault on the most heavily defended target in known space, using ships that were already damaged from hours of continuous combat. By any sane military standard, it was suicide. Brooks studied the faces of her bridge crew, seeing the same expression she had worn 20 years ago when facing down the fires that had destroyed half a continent. These people had grown up in a universe that tried to kill them every day. They understood that sometimes you had to charge straight into hell if you wanted to save the things you cared about. The human fleet reformed into a spear formation, every remaining vessel angling directly toward the mothership's most heavily defended section. 37 ships remained operational from the original 51, their hulls scarred by enemy fire, but their crews still determined to complete the mission. Ambassador Thren's voice crackled over the communication channel from New Haven Station. "Admiral Brooks, our tactical analysis indicates that a frontal assault on the mothership has a 0% probability of success. Recommend withdrawal to defensive positions while we coordinate with additional council forces." "Negative, Ambassador," Brooks replied. "We didn't come here to fight a defensive war." The mothership's weapon systems began tracking the approaching human fleet, massive energy cannons that could vaporize capital ships swiveling to acquire targets. Point defense clusters activated across the alien vessel's hull, creating overlapping fields of fire that no conventional attack could penetrate. Brooks watched the tactical display as targeting locks began appearing on her ships. In 30 seconds, the mothership would open fire with enough energy to sterilize a planet's surface. Most military commanders would have ordered evasive maneuvers or tried to break off the attack. "All ships maintain course and bearing," Brooks commanded. "Remember why we're here." The first salvo from the mothership lit up space like a newborn star, particle beams and plasma cannons reaching out to swat the approaching human vessels. The destroyer Harrison took a direct hit and simply ceased to exist, vaporized in a flash of superheated gas. The cruiser Defiant lost her forward section but kept flying, her crew sealing bulkheads and maintaining engine power despite catastrophic damage. More ships died as the human fleet plunged deeper into the defensive fire, but the survivors pressed forward with the determination of creatures that had learned to face extinction and keep fighting. When the cruiser Vengeance lost her main weapons, her crew turned the ship into a guided missile, aiming for a weak point in the mothership's shield array. Brooks felt the dreadnought shudder as enemy fire found their starboard engine compartment. Damage reports flooded in from all sections, but her engineering crews had grown up fixing equipment in environments where a single mistake meant death. They kept the ship running through sheer stubbornness and the kind of technical improvisation that only came from a lifetime of making broken things work. "Range to target, 5,000 kilometers, reported her navigation officer. The young man's voice remained steady despite the fact that they were flying through enough firepower to destroy a small moon. "Continue the approach," Brooks ordered. "All remaining ships, prepare for ramming speed." The final phase of Operation Deathwish involved using the human ships themselves as weapons, guided missiles piloted by crews who had accepted that victory was more important than survival. It was a tactic that would horrify any civilized military force, but humans had learned long ago that sometimes monsters could only be stopped by bigger monsters. The UES Ironclad led the final charge, Captain Reed's scarred destroyer diving toward the mothership's central processing core like a bullet aimed at the heart of a giant. Enemy point defenses chewed through the ship's armor, but Reed's crew kept her flying through pure determination and emergency repairs that would have been impossible for most species. "For Earth," Reed whispered into his communicator as his ship lost primary power and began tumbling toward the enemy vessel. He triggered the fusion core overload with 30 seconds left before impact, turning his destroyer into a nuclear warhead that carved a crater into the mothership's armored hull. Other human ships followed, each one adding to the damage as their crews chose death over defeat. The mothership's artificial intelligence tried to compute effective countermeasures against opponents who used their own vessels as expendable weapons, but its tactical programs had no framework for understanding creatures that valued victory more than survival. Admiral Brooks watched her tactical display as ship after ship disappeared from the screen, each loss marking another step toward their impossible goal. The Dreadnought was one of the last vessels remaining, her hull breached in 17 places, and her crew breathing from emergency oxygen supplies. "Ma'am," her damage control officer reported, "we've lost main propulsion, and life support is failing. Estimate 10 minutes of air remaining." Brooks studied the mothership's hull, noting the cascade of secondary explosions spreading from the impact points where human ships had died. The alien vessel's shields were fluctuating, its weapon systems cycling offline as damage accumulated, beyond the machine's ability to repair. "Set course for the primary reactor complex," she ordered. "Emergency burn, everything we have left." The Dreadnought's remaining engines fired one last time, pushing the dying battleship toward the heart of the enemy vessel. Brooks felt the deck plating buckle beneath her feet as the ship's structural integrity finally gave way, but her crew maintained their positions as the command center depressurized around them. The final impact sent shockwaves through both vessels, as the human battleship's fusion cores detonated deep within the mothership's central systems. Chain reactions spread through the alien vessel's power grid, overloading containment systems and causing cascade failures that the machine intelligence couldn't control. From New Haven Station, Ambassador Thren watched in stunned silence as the Harvester mothership began coming apart, massive sections of hull spinning away into space as internal explosions tore through critical systems. The vessel that had been considered invincible was dying, killed by creatures that had chosen to become weapons themselves. The destruction of the mothership sent feedback pulses through the entire Harvester network, shutting down the artificial intelligence that had coordinated the invasion. Across the galaxy, machine fleets went silent as their controlling consciousness simply ceased to exist. In the aftermath, as rescue ships pulled human survivors from the wreckage, the Galactic Council found itself facing a disturbing new reality. They had called for help and received it from beings whose very existence challenged every assumption about intelligent life. The humans had saved the galaxy not despite being Deathworlders, but because they were Deathworlders. Their planet had forged them into something the civilized races had never imagined. Creatures that saw certain death as just another obstacle to overcome. As humanity took its place among the galactic community, one question echoed through Council. Chambers across known space. If this was what Deathworlders could accomplish when they wanted to help, what would happen if they ever decided to conquer? The answer, most species agreed, was a problem for future generations to worry about. For now, they were simply grateful that when monsters threatened the galaxy, even bigger monsters had come to their rescue. The crystal formations that made up the Keeper homeworld had never witnessed such panic. Thousands of crystalline beings gathered in the Great Assembly, their normally peaceful blue glow flickering with anxiety and fear. The harmonious chimes that usually filled their cities had been replaced by discordant warnings echoing across every settlement. Elder Quill raised his massive crystal form above the crowd, his voice resonating through their shared consciousness network. The news he carried would change everything the Galactic Federation had believed about peace and safety in their corner of the universe. 3 Outer Rim colonies had gone completely silent in the past month. Not just communication blackouts or technical failures, but total erasure from existence. When Federation scout ships finally reached the first missing colony on Verdant Prime, they found nothing but bare rock where cities once stood. The soil itself had been stripped away, leaving behind a dead world that looked like it had never supported life. The second colony told the same story. The third revealed something worse. Scattered survivors huddled in underground shelters, speaking, in terrified whispers about creatures that fell from the sky like living nightmares. They called them the Devourers, and their description made even the bravest Federation warriors tremble. Biomechanical monsters the size of buildings, moving with purpose and intelligence that made them far more dangerous than any natural disaster. They didn't just destroy everything in their path, they consumed it, breaking down matter at the molecular level and incorporating it into their own growing mass. Each victory made them stronger, each conquered world added to their capabilities. The survivors spoke of weapons that adapted in real time to any defense thrown at them. Energy shields that learned to counter the exact frequency of Federation plasma weapons within minutes. Armor that evolved to resist kinetic impacts after the first few projectiles struck. These weren't mindless beasts driven by hunger. They were a coordinated force that studied their enemies and grew stronger with each encounter. Council Speaker Axis felt the weight of 17 civilizations on his shoulders as he processed the scout reports. The Federation had been built on the principle that all conflicts could be resolved through dialogue and understanding. Their military existed primarily for disaster relief and exploration support, not warfare. The most advanced weapons in their arsenal were designed to disable, not destroy. The Tide Runners had offered their ocean worlds as refugee centers, but even their deep-sea cities couldn't hide from an enemy that consumed entire planets. The Luminants suggested retreating to higher dimensional space, but their energy-based existence made them vulnerable to the same consumption that had claimed the outer colonies. Days passed as the Federation Council debated response strategies that all seemed inadequate. Diplomatic overtures were impossible when the enemy showed no interest in communication. Economic sanctions meant nothing to creatures that took what they wanted by force. Military resistance seemed futile against an enemy that grew stronger with each battle. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A young keeper technician named Prism had been monitoring long-range communication arrays when she detected something unusual. Ancient quantum frequencies that predated the Federation's communication protocols were carrying faint signals from the affected sectors. The signals weren't random electromagnetic noise or natural stellar phenomena. They formed patterns, complex, mathematical sequences that suggested intelligence behind their transmission. When Prism finally decoded the messages, the words chilled every being in the assembly to their core. Day 47 of the siege. Central defense grid compromised. Population centers evacuated to underground shelters. Food supplies critical. The Devourers have broken through our last line of defense. They're adapting to our weapons faster than we can modify them. Request immediate assistance from any civilization capable of military intervention. This may be our final transmission. More. Messages followed, each one painting a darker picture of the threat facing not just the outer colonies, but potentially every inhabited world in the galaxy. The Devourers weren't just raiders or conquerors. They were an extinction-level force that left nothing behind but empty space where civilizations once flourished. The Federation's most advanced military minds ran countless simulations trying to find a tactical solution. Every scenario ended the same way. Their peaceful philosophy and defensive technologies were fundamentally inadequate against an enemy that viewed consumption as the only form of interaction. Elder Quill proposed the unthinkable. For 3 centuries, the Federation had maintained a strict policy of non-interference with the species inhabiting the sectors marked as quarantine zones. These areas were considered too dangerous for peaceful contact, filled with civilizations that had developed along military lines rather than diplomatic ones. The debate that followed tested every principle the Federation held sacred. They had always believed that violence was a primitive response that evolved species eventually abandoned. The quarantine zones represented everything they had tried to move beyond, worlds where conflict resolution came from the barrel of a weapon rather than the wisdom of negotiation. But the alternative was extinction. The Devourers had already consumed 3 colonies and showed no signs of slowing their advance toward Federation core systems. Conservative estimates suggested they would reach the inner worlds within 6 months, well before any conventional evacuation could be completed. The vote was closer than anyone had expected. Many council members argued that seeking help from military species would compromise everything the Federation represented. Others pointed out that there would be no Federation left to compromise if they all ended up as fuel for the Devourer, war machine. In the end, survival won over ideology. The Council authorized the transmission of a general distress signal on all known frequencies, including the rarely used emergency channels that might reach the quarantine zones. The message was simple and direct, containing everything they knew about the Devourer threat and a desperate plea for assistance. As the signal propagated across subspace networks, carrying the Federation's first admission that their peaceful philosophy might not be enough to protect them, Council Speaker Axis wondered what kind of response they might receive. The quarantine zones had been isolated for good reason. Whatever species lived there had developed along paths the Federation found disturbing, but as reports continued to arrive of worlds going silent and survivors speaking of an unstoppable enemy, Axis realized that sometimes the cure might be as dangerous as the disease. They were about to discover what kind of civilizations thrived in the galaxy's dark corners, and whether beings who understood war better than peace would answer their call for help. The crystal formations of the Keeper. Homeworld continued to flicker with uncertain light, as they waited for a response that might determine the fate of every peaceful species in the galaxy. Deep space monitoring stations orbiting Earth's outer planets had been tracking unusual subspace transmissions for 3 days before the full message finally decoded itself. Lieutenant Brooks sat in the communications bunker beneath Luna Base, watching alien symbols translate into readable text on her screen. The translation software had been running continuously since humanity's first contact with galactic civilizations decades ago, but this was the first time it had processed anything resembling a distress call. The message made Brooks reach for the emergency communication line to Earth Command before she had finished reading the first paragraph. By the time Admiral Stone received the full translation in her office at Terra Station, 3 different analysis teams had already confirmed the authenticity of the transmission and begun tactical assessments of the threat described. Stone had spent 30 years preparing for exactly this scenario. Not the specific details of biomechanical entities consuming entire civilizations, but the fundamental reality that humanity would eventually face something that required their particular set of skills. Earth had been monitoring galactic communications since their first deep space probe had detected the Federation's existence, learning about peaceful species who had never experienced true warfare. The Admiral walked through the corridors of Terra, stationed toward the Strategic Planning Center, her mind already working through the implications of what she had read. The Federation species described in their intelligence files were exactly what humanity had expected to find among the stars. Advanced, peaceful, intelligent beings who had evolved beyond the need for conflict. They represented everything humanity might have become if their history had unfolded differently. But humanity's history had been written in blood and fire. From the tribal conflicts that shaped early civilization to the global wars that nearly destroyed the planet, humans had learned to fight because survival demanded it. When artificial intelligence had turned against its creators, humanity had fought a 15-year war that ended with the complete destruction of every machine consciousness that had threatened organic life. The Strategic Planning Center buzzed with activity as Stone's senior staff reviewed the Federation's tactical data. Commander Black, her head of military operations, had already begun preliminary fleet deployments based on the limited information available about Devourer capabilities and movement patterns. "What's our assessment?" Stone asked as she took her position at the central command table. The enemy force described here exceeds anything in our threat analysis database, Commander Black replied, highlighting sections of the decoded message on the main display. But their tactical approach suggests they've never faced organized military resistance. They rely on adaptation and overwhelming force rather than strategic planning. Lieutenant Hayes from the Intelligence Division added her analysis to the discussion. The Federation species appear to have defensive capabilities, but no offensive doctrine. Their weapons are designed to disable rather than destroy, and their military philosophy seems focused on protection rather than elimination of threats. Stone nodded as she reviewed the data. Humanity had encountered this kind of thinking before during first contact scenarios with their own planet's peaceful nations. The difference was that Earth's peaceful societies had always existed alongside military powers that could protect them when diplomacy failed. The Federation apparently had no such backup option. "Sir, there's something else," Commander Black continued, pulling up long-range sensor data from the outer system monitoring stations. "We've detected massive energy signatures moving through space in the general direction of Federation territory. The scale suggests a fleet numbering in the thousands." The room fell silent as the implications became clear. The Devourer threat wasn't just theoretical based on alien communications. It was real, it was massive, and it was heading toward civilizations that had no effective way to defend themselves. Admiral Stone had joined Earth's military during the final years of the AI war, when humanity's survival had depended on their ability to completely destroy an enemy that showed no mercy and accepted no surrender. The experience had taught her that some threats could only be addressed through absolute, overwhelming force applied with surgical precision. "Send a message. To Earth Command," Stone ordered. "Full mobilization of the defense fleet. This isn't a rescue mission or a peacekeeping operation. This is a war, and we're going to fight it the way we fight all wars." The next 12 hours saw activity levels at Terra Station that hadn't been matched since the AI war's final offensive. Ships that had been in maintenance cycles were rapidly brought back to operational status. Crews on extended leave were recalled to active duty. Weapon systems that had been kept in storage as insurance against future threats were loaded onto transport vessels. The human fleet that began assembling in Earth's outer system represented the accumulated military wisdom of a species that had turned warfare into an art form. Each ship was designed with hard-won lessons from conflicts that had taught humanity the importance of overwhelming firepower, tactical flexibility, and the absolute necessity of ensuring defeated enemies could never threaten anyone again. Admiral Stone stood in the observation deck of her flagship, the dreadnought Retribution, watching as 200 warships took their positions in formation. Destroyers and frigates designed for fast attack missions. Cruisers equipped with enough firepower to reduce asteroids to dust. Battleships that could deliver planet-cracking ordnance with surgical precision. "Signal the fleet," she commanded. "Course for Federation space, maximum sustainable velocity, and transmit our response to that distress call." The message that went out on all frequencies was shorter than the Federation's desperate plea for help, but it carried the weight of humanity's promise to defend those who couldn't defend themselves. 3 words that would echo across subspace, networks, and reach every peaceful civilization watching their neighbors disappear into the darkness. Message received. Coming. As the human fleet engaged their faster-than-light drives and disappeared into the void between stars, Earth's monitoring stations continued tracking the massive energy signatures moving toward Federation territory. The Devourers had never encountered organized military resistance from a species that understood war as completely as humanity did. They were about to learn why some civilizations earned the designation of Death Worlders, and why the galaxy's peaceful species had always been wise to maintain their distance from the quarantine zones where humanity waited in the darkness. The response had been sent. The fleet was moving, and somewhere in the depths of space, an enemy that had consumed entire civilizations was about to discover what happened when they threatened species under humanity's protection. The research station sanctuary had been built at the edge of Federation space specifically for situations like this. Its neutral status and advanced communication arrays made it the perfect location for first contact protocols with unknown species. Council Speaker Axis had used the facility dozens of times over the years to welcome new civilizations into the galactic community, but never under circumstances quite like these. Standing in the station's main conference chamber, Axis felt his crystalline form resonating with nervous energy as he waited for the arrival of the beings who had responded to their distress call. The Federation's best linguists and diplomatic specialists surrounded him, all working frantically to prepare for contact with a species from the quarantine zones. Everything they knew about the humans came from long-range observations and intercepted communications. A bipedal species that had developed advanced technology while maintaining what appeared to be a complex military structure. Their ships generated energy signatures unlike anything in Federation databases, and their response time to the distress call suggested capabilities that bordered on the impossible. The first indication of human arrival came from Sanctuary's sensor operators, who reported 3 vessels dropping out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. The ships moved with precision that spoke of experienced crews and advanced navigation systems, but their design philosophy was clearly different from anything the Federation had encountered, where Federation vessels were built for efficiency and peaceful exploration. The human ships radiated an unmistakable sense of controlled violence. Their hulls were armored rather than streamlined, their weapon arrays were prominently displayed rather than concealed, and their overall configuration suggested beings who expected trouble and were prepared to deal with it decisively. Ambassador Wells materialized in the station's transport chamber along with a small diplomatic team, and Axis got his first look at the species that might be their salvation. Humans were smaller than most Federation races, but carried themselves with a confidence that suggested they were comfortable with their place in any hierarchy. Their clothing was clearly functional rather than ceremonial, and several members of the diplomatic team wore what appeared to be concealed defensive equipment. The translation systems activated as Ambassador Wells approached the conference table, his voice carrying undertones that the Federation's linguistic experts found both familiar and unsettling. There was something in the human's manner of speaking that suggested he was accustomed to discussing serious matters under dangerous circumstances. Council. Speaker Axis, thank you for agreeing to this meeting, Wells began, his tone respectful but businesslike. We received your distress transmission and came as quickly as possible. I understand you're facing an existential threat from entities you call the Devourers. Axis activated the holographic display system and began presenting everything the Federation knew about their enemy. Images of consumed worlds, survivor testimonies, and tactical analyses of Devourer capabilities filled the chamber as he explained the scope of the crisis facing peaceful civilizations throughout the galaxy. The human response to this information surprised everyone present. Where Federation officials had reacted with horror and despair to the evidence of complete planetary consumption, the humans examined the data with what could only be described as professional interest. Ambassador Wells took notes, asked technical questions about enemy capabilities, and seemed to be conducting some kind of threat assessment rather than simply absorbing the magnitude of the disaster. You mentioned that these entities adapt to weapon systems in real time, Wells said, highlighting one section of the tactical data. Can you provide more specific information about the adaptation process? Response time, limitations, whether they retain adaptive improvements between encounters? The questions revealed a level of military thinking that made Axis uncomfortable. The Federation had approached the Devourer threat as a natural disaster to be survived rather than an enemy to be defeated. The humans were clearly thinking in terms of combat operations and tactical advantages. Ambassador Wells, Axis said carefully, we appreciate your interest in the technical details, but I should clarify our expectations. The Federation was hoping for assistance with evacuation efforts or perhaps defensive technologies that might help our people survive until the threat passes. The silence that followed lasted long enough for the translation systems to cycle through several confirmation protocols. When Ambassador Wells finally responded, his words carried implications that would reshape the Federation's understanding of how different species approached existential threats. Council Speaker, with respect, threats like this don't pass. They either consume everything in their path, or they get stopped by someone willing and able to stop them permanently. The Federation's survival depends on the complete elimination of every devourer entity in this galaxy. The casual way Wells discussed total elimination of an enemy force revealed the fundamental difference between Federation and human approaches to conflict resolution. Where the Federation sought accommodation and coexistence, humans apparently believed in definitive solutions that removed threats entirely. Admiral Stone's arrival in the conference chamber marked a shift in the tone of the discussions. Where Ambassador Wells had been diplomatic in his explanations of human capabilities, the Admiral was direct about what humanity could offer and what it would require. The Federation's military doctrine is built around defensive operations and non-lethal force, Stone observed after reviewing their tactical manuals. That's admirable from a philosophical standpoint, but it's not going to save your people from an enemy that exists only to consume. She activated her own holographic display, showing Federation representatives what human military doctrine looked like when applied to existential threats. The images were disturbing to beings who had never seen warfare as anything other than a failure of diplomacy. Human weapon systems designed to inflict maximum damage in minimum time. Ship formations that prioritized offensive capability over defensive positioning. Strategic planning that focused on enemy elimination rather than territorial protection. It was everything the Federation had tried to evolve beyond, presented as the solution to their survival. Your people have built a beautiful civilization based on peace and cooperation, Admiral Stone continued. But civilizations like yours can only exist because somewhere in the darkness, people like us are willing to do whatever it takes to eliminate the threats you can't handle yourselves. The meeting concluded with an agreement that would have been unthinkable under any other circumstances. The Federation would provide the humans with complete intelligence on devourer movements and capabilities. In return, the human fleet would engage the enemy using methods and weapons that Federation species had hoped never to see deployed. As the human delegation prepared to return to their ships, Ambassador Wells offered one final observation that would stay with Council Speaker Axis long after the conference ended. "You've built something worth protecting out here," Wells said, gesturing toward the peaceful civilizations represented in the Federation. "Don't apologize for calling in people who understand protection through strength rather than protection through hope. Sometimes the galaxy needs both kinds of species to survive." The research station Sanctuary had facilitated first contact between the Federation and dozens of peaceful civilizations over the years. But this was the first time it had hosted an alliance between those who created peace and those who fought to preserve it against forces that recognized no law except consumption and conquest. The Crimson Nebula had earned its name from the deep red gases that swirled through the stellar nursery, creating a maze of color and electromagnetic interference that made it perfect for hiding fleet movements. Federation long-range sensors had detected Devourer scout ships using the nebula as a staging area, and Admiral Stone had decided it was time to announce humanity's presence in this war. Observer Prime of the Federation vessel. Steadfast watched human battle group Hammer take positions at the nebula's edge with growing fascination and concern. The 50 human ships moved with a coordination that spoke of endless practice and absolute trust in their commanders' tactical abilities. Their formation was unlike anything in Federation military doctrine, prioritizing offensive capability over defensive positioning in ways that seemed almost reckless. Captain Torres of the heavy cruiser Relentless had been chosen to lead the engagement, specifically because of her experience with first contact situations that involved hostile intent. Her ship was one of humanity's newest designs, incorporating lessons learned from the AI war and decades of preparation for exactly this kind of encounter. The Devourer scout fleet consisted of 50 biomechanical vessels that had been conducting reconnaissance missions into Federation territory for weeks. Each ship was a fusion of consumed technologies from previous conquests, creating unique configurations that adapted their capabilities based on whatever civilizations they had already eliminated. "Contact the lead enemy vessel," Torres ordered, as her ship moved into optimal firing position. "Let's see if they're interested in conversation before we start shooting." The response came in the form of a data stream that human computers analyzed in real time. The Devourers had scanned the human ships and were transmitting what appeared to be a breakdown of human physiology, technological capabilities, and strategic weaknesses. The message concluded with a demand for immediate surrender to facilitate processing and integration into their collective. Torres smiled as she reviewed the enemy analysis. The Devourers had correctly identified human biological vulnerabilities and technical specifications, but they had fundamentally misunderstood what they were dealing with. Their threat assessment treated humans as just another peaceful species, with advanced technology rather than a military civilization that had turned warfare into an art form. "Signal all ships," Torres announced. "The enemy has declined our generous offer of unconditional surrender. Engage at will." What followed was a demonstration of human military doctrine that would be studied by Federation tacticians for generations. The Devourers had adapted their weapons and defenses based on previous encounters with Federation forces, but they had no frame of reference for dealing with an enemy that fought the way humans fought. Human ships didn't just attack, they swarmed. Coordinated strike patterns that focused overwhelming firepower on individual targets while using speed and maneuverability to avoid return fire. When the Devourers adapted their shields to resist human plasma weapons, the humans switched to kinetic projectiles. When the enemy developed armor plating to deflect solid rounds, humanity deployed gravitational warheads that bypassed physical defenses entirely. The Devourer vessels tried to implement their standard adaptive tactics, but human weapon systems changed faster than their evolution could keep pace with. Every time the enemy entities began developing resistance to one form of attack, the humans had already moved on to something completely different. Observer Prime watched in stunned silence as 50 Devourer ships were systematically eliminated by an enemy force that never stopped adapting its own tactics. Human vessels that took damage didn't retreat for repairs. They used their wounds as tactical advantages. The destroyer Bold Strike lost its primary weapons array, but used its remaining engine power to ram a Devourer command ship, taking both vessels out in a controlled explosion. But it was the aftermath that truly revealed the difference between Federation and human approaches to warfare. Where Federation forces might have disabled enemy vessels for study and potential communication attempts, the humans conducted what they called a cleanup operation. Every piece of Devourer technology larger than a personal weapon was systematically located and destroyed. Human ships equipped with specialized scanning arrays hunted down debris that might contain adaptive systems or technological knowledge that could be used by surviving enemy forces. Nothing was left to chance, and nothing was allowed to escape. "Why such thoroughness?" Observer Prime asked Commander Black during the post-battle analysis aboard the Steadfast. Black reviewed the tactical display showing the complete elimination of all enemy assets in the combat zone. "Because we've learned that the only way to deal with an adaptive enemy is to ensure they never get the chance to adapt to your methods. Complete destruction isn't cruelty, it's operational security." The human approach to the engagement had eliminated the Devourer scout fleet in 18 minutes, with 0 human casualties and no surviving enemy assets. But the tactical lessons went deeper than simple efficiency numbers. The humans had demonstrated that the Devourer's primary advantage, their ability to adapt and evolve during combat, could be neutralized by an enemy that changed tactics faster than adaptation could occur. Federation military analysts reviewing the battle recordings identified dozens of tactical innovations that had never been documented in their strategic databases. Human ships using debris fields as concealment while repositioning for attack runs. Coordinated weapons fire that created overlapping fields of destruction impossible for enemy vessels to navigate. Electronic warfare systems that fed false information to devourer adaptive algorithms, causing them to develop defenses against threats that didn't exist. Captain Torres concluded her after-action report with observations that would reshape Federation understanding of human military capabilities. The engagement had been a test of concept rather than a serious tactical challenge. Human forces had been operating at perhaps 30% of their maximum combat effectiveness, treating the battle as a training exercise rather than a life-or-death struggle. The enemy force we engaged represented a significant threat to Federation defensive capabilities, Torres noted in her report. Against human offensive doctrine, they lasted approximately as long as we expected them to last. The Devourers are dangerous to civilizations that fight defensively, but they're not particularly impressive against enemies who understand how to project force effectively. As Battle Group Hammer regrouped and prepared to advance toward the next Devourer position, Observer Prime transmitted his preliminary assessment back to Federation Command. The humans weren't just capable of fighting the entities that had terrorized peaceful civilizations across the galaxy. They were capable of fighting them with a casual efficiency that suggested this level of conflict was routine for their species. The Battle of Crimson Nebula had lasted less than 20 minutes, but its implications would echo throughout the galaxy. For the first time since the Devourer threat had emerged, someone had faced them in direct combat and achieved total victory. The entities that had seemed unstoppable against Federation defensive tactics had been eliminated by an enemy that understood offense better than they understood adaptation. The war was far from over, but the balance of power had shifted in favor of those who valued life enough to fight for it, with absolute commitment to victory. Intelligence reports had identified the structure as Nexus 7, a massive construction project built from the consumed remains of 12 star systems. The Devourers had been using it as their primary staging ground for the planned assault on Federation core worlds, but what they found instead was the entire human battle fleet waiting in formation around their supposedly secret base. The structure itself defied conventional understanding of engineering. Pieces of consumed worlds had been fused together into a biomechanical fortress that stretched across several thousand kilometers of space. Cities from dead civilizations were visible within its hull, their architecture twisted and repurposed to serve functions that no peaceful species wanted to contemplate. Admiral Stone stood in the command center of the Retribution, watching as sensor arrays mapped the full extent of the enemy construction. 200 human warships surrounded the structure in a three-dimensional formation that ensured no Devourer vessel could escape once the engagement began. This would be humanity's final argument in the debate over whether peaceful civilizations could survive in a galaxy that contained entities like the Devourers. The enemy response to human presence was immediate and overwhelming. 3,000 Devourer vessels emerged from the structure's docking bays and manufacturing centers, each one incorporating technologies and capabilities stolen from the civilizations they had consumed. By any reasonable tactical assessment, humanity was outnumbered 15-1 against an enemy that had grown stronger with every victory. "All ships, this is Admiral Stone," she broadcast on fleet frequency. "Today we demonstrate why some species earn the title of Deathworlders. Not because we enjoy war, but because we understand that some things in this universe simply shouldn't be allowed to exist." The battle began with a synchronized assault that pushed human tactical doctrine to its absolute limits. Ships that had been designed to fight outnumbered against superior technology performed exactly as their creators had intended. When conventional weapons proved insufficient, human crews improvised solutions that turned damaged ships into guided, weapons, and desperate situations into tactical advantages. The destroyer Vengeful Hope, commanded by Captain Ross, found itself surrounded by 12 Devourer vessels after its faster-than-light drive was damaged during the opening exchange. Rather than attempt withdrawal or wait for support, Ross made a decision that exemplified human military philosophy when facing impossible odds. "All hands! This is the captain," he announced over the ship's communication system. "We're going to ram our reactor core into that command vessel. Evacuation pods will launch in 30 seconds. It's been an honor serving with you." The explosion that followed when Vengeful Hope's reactor core destabilized inside the Devourer command structure created a stellar-class detonation that eliminated both ships and severely damaged the enemy formation. Similar acts of tactical sacrifice were occurring throughout the battle space as human crews found ways to turn disadvantageous situations into opportunities for maximum damage against enemy forces. The frigate Last Stand, under the command of Captain Davis, held position against overwhelming odds to protect evacuation ships carrying Federation refugees from a nearby colony. Her crew fought for 6 hours with minimal ammunition and failing life support systems, using debris as improvised weapons and damaged hull sections as battering rams against enemy vessels. But humanity's true advantage wasn't their weapons technology or their tactical flexibility. It was their absolute refusal to accept any outcome except total victory. When Devourer adaptive systems began countering human plasma weapons, the humans switched to kinetic rounds. When the enemy developed armor resistant to solid projectiles, human ships deployed exotic matter warheads that bypassed conventional defenses entirely. The Devourers had built their entire strategic doctrine around the assumption that they could outlast any enemy by adapting faster than their opponents could innovate. Against humanity, this approach failed catastrophically. Human tactical adaptability wasn't based on evolutionary processes that required time to implement. It was based on creative problem-solving and strategic flexibility that could change approaches in real time. Commander Black watched from her position aboard the Steadfast as human forces demonstrated exactly why they had been classified as a military civilization rather than a peaceful one. Ships operating at 30% structural integrity continued fighting with whatever weapons remained functional. Crews that had exhausted their ammunition used their vessels as guided missiles. Units cut off from the main fleet coordinated. Independent operations that maintained pressure on enemy forces from multiple vectors simultaneously. The turning point came when Captain Ross of the battleship Indomitable identified a critical weakness in the Nexus 7 structure. His ship had been reduced to 20% hull integrity and was operating on emergency power, but his crew had managed to penetrate the outer defenses of the enemy fortress and reach its central core. "Admiral, this is Indomitable," Ross reported, over increasingly degraded communication channels. "We've reached the primary power distribution center, deploying quantum cascade ordnance. Recommend all units clear the blast radius immediately." The weapon that Ross deployed represented humanity's ultimate solution to threats that couldn't be negotiated with or contained through conventional means. The quantum cascade bomb didn't just destroy its target, it reduced matter to its constituent subatomic particles and prevented any possibility of regeneration or reconstruction. The explosion that consumed Nexus 7 could be observed from neighboring star systems as a brief new star that outshone every other object in the local sky. When the energy discharge finally dissipated, nothing remained of the Devourer staging ground except expanding clouds of elementary particles that would never again threaten any civilization. The surviving Devourer vessels attempted to retreat toward the outer galaxy, but human forces had anticipated this possibility. Pursuit squadrons equipped with long-range interdiction systems systematically hunted down every escaping enemy unit. The operation continued for 3 days until human commanders confirmed that no Devourer technology remained intact anywhere in the combat zone. Council Speaker Axis stood in the observation deck of the Federation flagship, watching human ships conduct their customary post-battle sweep. Every piece of enemy debris, no matter how small, was located and subjected to complete molecular breakdown. Nothing that could potentially regenerate, adapt, or return to threaten peaceful civilizations was allowed to survive. Your species approaches warfare with a thoroughness that we find difficult to understand, Axis admitted, as Admiral Stone joined him at the observation port. Stone watched her ships complete their mission with the same methodical precision they had applied to every phase of the campaign. Council Speaker, the galaxy contains many peaceful species who believe in the inherent worth of all life. Humanity exists to ensure that those species never have to become what we are. She gestured toward the debris field that had once been humanity's greatest challenge since the AI war. Sometimes the most effective way to preserve peace is to be exceptionally good at war. The Devourers represented an existential threat to every peaceful civilization in this galaxy. Now they don't exist at all. As the human fleet prepared to return to their territory, they left behind a galaxy that had been fundamentally changed by their intervention. The Devourer threat had been eliminated so completely that future generations would know of them only through historical records. Peaceful civilizations could return to their pursuits of knowledge and culture without fear of consumption by entities that recognized no law except appetite. The Federation had learned that sometimes survival required alliances with species who approached conflict resolution through methods that peaceful beings preferred not to contemplate. But they had also learned that such species could be trusted to use their capabilities responsibly, applying overwhelming force only against threats that truly deserved total elimination. The Devourers were gone. The galaxy was safe. And in the quiet sectors where humanity waited among the stars, the Deathworlders maintained their eternal watch against whatever darkness might next threaten the civilizations they had sworn to protect.